The like clip on my microphone that like clips it to my shirt broke off. So we're doing, I feel like I've seen a lot of YouTubers before just like holding the mic instead of clipping it. I never understood why. Maybe their clips just broke. I wanted to do a reading update vlog, I guess. I did not read very much this year. Like in terms of the number of books, it's probably like one of my worst reading years since I started doing reading vlogs. But the thing is, I was moving. I have my first full-time job, and I just had a lot going on. And the books that I read this year, I enjoyed a lot. So listen, in terms of page count, maybe you might say it was a bad reading year, right? But for me, it was a good reading year because I read good things, okay? So that's what I'm going to tell myself. But I did continue to, post everything to my story graph. So today, I'm just going to look through my story graph stats. I really enjoyed doing that last year. Last year, I had like 20 books to talk about, and this year I have 13. Oh, 14. Did I finish a book at the last minute? Oh, yeah, I did. Okay, so I read 14 books in 2022. I read 5,491 pages, which I think is more pages than I read in 2021. Okay, no, in 2021 I read 6,859 pages. So even my page count went down, but quite frankly, in terms of page count, like, I'm still pretty close to where I was last year. So I guess I just read like longer books, which does make sense now that I think about it. So the first thing on here is moods. I had this problem last year too. The biggest slice of my pie chart for moods was adventurous, which totally makes sense because, oh my gosh, yeah, like every book that I read this year that I enjoyed is in the adventurous category, which is a lot of the Trials of Apollo series. A lot of the stats that you're going to see are going to be the Trials of Apollo series because I read all 5 books in a year, which is crazy for me. The only other time I've read an entire series in a year was when I reread the Harry Potter series in college, and that was the only thing I read that year. So reading an entire series while reading other stuff, like that took some commitment for me. I was very invested in the Trials of Apollo. So a lot of the stats are going to be Trials of Apollo or Heartstopper because I read all 4 existing volumes of the Heartstopper graphic novel series, which are also going to kind of skew the statistics. But yeah, adventurous, I have the Trials of Apollo series. I started the Farseer trilogy. Oh yeah, back in January, I read the second book in this Star Trek trilogy. That was so long ago, and I do really need to read the 3rd book before I forget about what I read. And How Long Till Black Future Month, the short story collection by N.K. Jemisin. Sure, all of those things seem adventurous. I agree with that. Emotional, sure. Heartstopper. Farseer trilogy. I don't know. Emotional. I mean, like, definitely there's, like, death and stuff in this series. I guess I'll go ahead and start talking about the Farseer trilogy. So actually, this is because of StoryGraph. Last year, I looked at my StoryGraph, and one of the biggest sections for me in genre was fantasy. And I was like, I guess I like fantasy. I don't know. I'm actually, like, really surprised because I don't feel like I'm a fantasy person. But, like, when you count Percy Jackson, The City We Became, Beneath the Sugar Sky, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, like, yeah, okay, yeah. And I was like, oh, maybe next year I'll try to read more fantasy. We'll see in my genres, but I can already guess that a lot of the books I read this year were fantasy. So I reached out to my friend Amber, who really likes fantasy, like all kinds of fantasy. And I was like, I want something that's, I don't know, like a little more bulky. And she gave me the first book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, The Assassin's Apprentice. And I basically went into it blind, like genuinely, like it starts out so it chronicles the life of this guy who is the bastard son of a king. Can I say that on YouTube? And in this world, if you're like part of the royal bloodline, you like have a higher chance of having these magical powers, but normal people also have these magical powers. It's like, I don't know, I don't quite understand the magical lore yet. So he has these magical powers. The one that's really focused on, I think, like towards the beginning of this book, is that he can like connect with animals. He can understand their thoughts. He can communicate with them, feel their pain. Like if an animal's like being abused, he feels it. I guess it is kind of emotional. Anyway, he can also do this with people, but he definitely starts discovering it with animals, I would say. Other people who have this skill can basically communicate telepathically if they master it enough. Fitz, our main character, becomes the apprentice of an assassin. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So he works for the king, basically trying to take down any threats that might come to the king. And the book kind of culminates, I would say like the last 100 or 200 pages are about him going on this journey to another kingdom where one of the princes is engaged to a princess from this other kingdom. And, you know, they're doing all these like pre-wedding, not ceremonies. As he's there, he has to find out like, I think that there's someone that like we want to keep our eye on, and his goal is basically to poison this person because we think he might be a threat to the king. And while he's there, things maybe turn out not the way we would quite expect. This first book focuses on him when he's like a kid. I am reading the second book and I think he's 15 now. So I remember like texting Amber like 100 pages in, and I was like, is he like a kid for like this whole series or this whole book? And like, I wasn't sure because I thought it was going to just kind of start out. And then like by the end of this book, he's going to be like a grown man. Because I was like, this is adult fiction. It's about a grown man. No, it's definitely targeted at adults. Like it's very verbose. I would not have enjoyed it as a kid. Also, the things that the adults say amongst each other while Fitz is in the room, it's like not appropriate for kids. I don't know. It was unexpected, I guess. I thought it was going to be, I don't know. It's like, I have this idea that stuff that's targeted at adults is like, tries to be too serious and like gritty and dark. And like, this book is dark. Like, again, like there's death and stuff. It can be pretty heavy. But like, we do have like the innocence of this child. And I think it like grounds it a bit more. So I really, really enjoyed it. So I started talking about it because I was going to say, I don't feel like it was particularly emotional. I guess there are emotional parts. Lighthearted. That's so funny. I knew Heartstopper would be on here. Heartstopper is simultaneously lighthearted and emotional. The Blood of Olympus? I forgot I also finished Heroes of Olympus. That means there's 6 Percy Jackson books on this. It's like half Rick Riordan last year. Anyway, I don't know if I would consider The Blood of Olympus lighthearted, but okay. They're fighting a war, man. Hopeful, Heartstopper. Funny, Trials of Apollo, right? Oh, come on! Heartstopper is listed under funny. I don't know how like the moods work on Storygraph, like if one person just decides them or if like the community tags them. Trials of Apollo is like the funniest thing I've ever read in my entire life. Some people, it's not for them. And I will probably do a whole video on Trials of Apollo if I can like whittle down all my thoughts so that it doesn't take an hour. Okay, I'll just like quickly summarize the Trials of Apollo as a series, not each book. Trials of Apollo is like the most recent Rick Riordan series, if I recall correctly. Basically, Apollo, you know, the god, gets his godhood revoked. He gets turned into a human by Zeus as like punishment for he doesn't even know what. He's like, why did this happen to me? He doesn't even know. He gets turned into a scrawny 16-year-old boy, and he teams up with this annoying 12-year-old girl, Meg McCaffrey, who I hated at first, but now I love her with every fiber of my being. And they team up to try to get Apollo his godhood back and maybe save the world along the way, you know, solve some prophecies, because Apollo is the god of the prophecy, so there's like always a prophecy. The stakes are bigger than just Apollo becoming a god again, which is kind of crazy, because that sounds like a pretty big deal. And oh my gosh, not everyone likes the Trials of Apollo, and that's fine. Like, I think I've heard some people say that they don't like Apollo's like narrative voice. To me, Apollo's narrative voice is the funniest thing in the world, because you're reading from the perspective of a god. He's like constantly name dropping famous people that he knows. He thinks he's like smarter and stronger than he is, but then he realizes he's like limited to this like terrible corporeal form. He just like really thinks he's like hot stuff, and he's not. And it's so funny to read. The way he talks, he's so annoying. But we're supposed to be annoyed with him. So it's funny. Like, to me, it's a joke that, like, we're all in on, except Apollo. But I get it. The first book is the funniest one, in my opinion. And if you don't like that jokey tone, it might be hard to get into the series, because it's hard to get past that first book. By the time you get to, like, book 3, it gets, like, more serious. And in my opinion, book 3 was my favorite, because it was, like, a really good balance, I guess, of the serious and funny. And each book kind of explores some characters that we've met in previous series. I feel like book 3 did the best job of like delving further into a couple of characters whose arcs we didn't know enough about, in my opinion. So book 3 was my favorite. Then after that, 4 and 5 are also higher stakes, less comedy. They were fine, just a little too actiony for me. But man, Trials of Apollo, hello, it should be listed under funny. It's the funniest thing I've ever feasted my eyeballs upon. After funny, we have challenging. This is probably going to be, oh yeah, How the Word is Passed. Mere Mortals. See, I think that people have different ideas of what challenging means. Like, is Mere Mortals maybe challenging because it's just dense and sci-fi? To me, challenging means something like How the Word is Passed. The subtitle is A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. It's by Clint Smith, and I read this way back in January. But to me, challenging is this kind of thing, where it challenges your notions. I will say I read this a long time ago, but I think about the things that I read fairly regularly. So he travels to all these different places in America and kind of looks at the way that these places are related to our history with slavery. Like a really big one is Jefferson's mansion house at Monticello. The museum that this has been turned into used to really glorify Jefferson. They're trying to do like a full 180, and now just showing the facts. I'm sure that they don't just completely crap on Jefferson the whole time, but they definitely address the slavery, his relationship with Sally, I can't remember her last name, but the children that he denied. You know, how these children are like direct descendants of Thomas Jefferson. And I had to find out through like Ancestry.com and stuff like that. They go to a plantation. I've been to this plantation, Whitney Plantation. It was actually really interesting because he had clearly gone, I think, a couple years after my family and I went, because there were things that had been added. That, or I just don't remember very well because I was quite a lot younger when we visited Whitney Plantation. But, it's just a plantation that has been preserved not for people to have their freaking weddings there, but to actually preserve and acknowledge the history. I'm mostly going off my actual memory of the place, but there was I can't remember what they call it, the Field of Angels, I think is what they called it. There's just a lot of recognition that you don't see from other plantations. It's not glorifying the good old days, It's recognizing what really happened on these plantations. He talks about prison and the racism in the prison system. Okay, this is so weird. I just grabbed the book to refresh my memory, and literally I went in order of the chapters. So he talks about Monticello, the Whitney Plantation, Angola Prison, Blandford Cemetery. I believe that's a Confederate cemetery. Galveston Island. Yeah, that was a really interesting one. I did not know that Juneteenth started in Galveston. So that was really interesting to learn about the history of Juneteenth. New York City, right? The quote for this one is, "We were the good guys," right? The racism and the slavery that existed in the Union as well, and these states and parts of the U.S. that maybe we say, oh, well, there was never a problem there, it was only the South. Not true. I would say, yeah, it was challenging, especially the things that are new information to you. So I would say, yeah, definitely challenging read, but also a fairly quick read. The chapters for me are like perfectly sized to read in like 45 minutes to an hour. Yeah, it's like heavy conceptually, but linguistically, like it's not hard to read. He does his best to make these challenging ideas accessible to the reader. After challenging, we have tense, which is probably one of the Percy Jackson. Yeah, Tyrant's Tomb. Sad, Heartstopper. The Sun Does Shine. The Sun Does Shine was the last book that I read this year. I finished it on December 31st because I just wanted to get one more book. It is the story of Anthony Ray Hinton, a man who was wrongly convicted of murder and sentenced to death row. He spent 30 years on death row for things that he did not do. He spent 30 years on death row because America's justice system is racist. He was not even in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was just a black man. He was at work when the crime happened. He had an alibi, and the judge and the jury and the court, whatever, I don't know my legal terms, just didn't listen to so much reason. There were bullets at the scene of the crime, and they found his mother's gun, and they said, oh, these clearly are from the same weapon, and they weren't. But because Hinton could not afford a good lawyer, he could not afford a good, analyst to see if the bullets matched with his mom's gun, the court turned against him, and he was sentenced to death. It's a heavy read. You follow his journey of falling into depression, of coping, of losing faith in God, and then coming back. And it's hard to read. You just want some kind of justice for him. He does get these lawyers who are on his side eventually and who do fight for him. And it's satisfying to read, but at the same time, it's like not only do I want him to be free, and I know that he is free, but as I'm reading, I just want him to be free, right? But also, he says, oh, I've forgiven the court that, convicted me basically just for being black. All I want to know is, why? What even was their motive? Because there's no way they believed that it was him. They knew. I mean, the police literally got, false evidence. Why? Was it to create a sense of security in the town? There was a real killer, running loose. I just don't understand the motivation. So all I really wanted was to, find out why and to see them get some kind of justice for, wrongfully convicting someone to death, intentionally, seemingly. That did not happen. Because this is a real world. This is a nonfiction book. So it's deeply frustrating to read. But it's a really good book. And yeah, this is a thing that started back in the 80s. I mean, his story started back in the 80s. But you also have to remind yourself that stuff like this still happens every single day. So that's a heavy read. I would have also probably put that under challenging. Reflective, How the Word is Passed, inspiring, The Sun Does Shine. Maybe because I'm white, I did not feel particularly, it inspired me to not be racist. Inspiring is interesting, sure. Informative, How the Word is Passed, definitely. I was informed. So those are the moods that I read this year. A lot of adventurous, emotional, and lighthearted, which sounds pretty much exactly right for the kinds of stuff that I like to read, especially this year. Like I said, it was a big year for fantasy, Percy Jackson, lots of adventurous kind of stuff. My pace. So I read 7% slow-paced books. I believe Farseer was considered slow-paced. I can definitely see this. And I will say I'm immersion reading the Farseer trilogy. I've never tried immersion reading before. Angela from Literature Science Alliance. Immersion reads so many things. So immersion reading is when you're reading with your eyes, but you're also listening to the audiobook at the same time. And it sounded really interesting to me. For some people, it just helps immerse you into the world. It, keeps you from getting distracted because kind of all your senses are going towards this book. Some people do it to read faster. I think some people do it to kind of slow them down and maybe not skim over details. For me, it's most of those. It's all of those things. So I basically wanted to try immersion reading because I am so intimidated by fantasy novels that are 500 pages long. I'm like, I know that I'm going to get distracted if I try to read this. I'm going to just like completely lose interest. And I'm a pretty slow reader, so it's going to take me like 3 months to read something that's 500 pages long. Immersion reading super helped me. I believe I read the Assassin's Apprentice in like 3 weeks. The way that it's written, it's so, again, it's verbose. There's no way that without the audiobook, I would not finish that in less than a month. But I did, because I just like, it sped me up a little bit, and it helped me not just completely zone out when like kind of boring things are being described. You know, that's just such a thing with fantasy. Like stuff is just like, they'll describe stuff for so long. But when someone's reading it to you, you're like, oh, that's actually really interesting. I can't explain it, but like someone's voice just makes it more interesting. If the narrator is good. So now I'm immersion reading the second book. So all this to say, it's marked as slow-paced. To me, it did not feel particularly slow-paced because I could feel myself like going through it so much faster than I thought I would, you know? Like genuinely there would be points where I would be like turning the page and my brain would be like, I'm already turning the page. Like it blew my mind. So to me, it did not feel slow-paced. But I do feel like if I were just reading with my eyeballs, like, yeah, I would say it's probably a slow-paced book. But for me, it didn't feel that way, you know? Medium-paced. How long till Black Future Month? That makes a lot of sense. Oh yeah, this totally makes sense. So the medium-paced books are nonfiction books. You can pace yourself however you want with this kind of stuff. And How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin, which is a short story collection. I don't feel like I super paced myself, though. I feel like I read through How Long Till Black Future Month pretty quickly. This is so weird. Why do I feel like I read through all these books quickly, but I didn't read anything? I think there were just like months where I didn't read. Also, I had like 2 books that I DNF'd, so maybe those kind of slowed me down. How Long Till Black Future Month, really good. I really liked N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became, but oh my goodness, the short stories, I loved them. She's really good at taking an idea and she's just like, what if blah, blah, blah? And then she explores that idea. City We Became. What if cities got condensed into human avatars? I know that The City We Became started out as a short story, and now it's like this 2-book thing. And I like it, and I'm so going to read the second book. But I kind of do feel like maybe it made more sense as a short story, because short stories are just great for this like interesting what if idea, and you only need, 20 pages or so to resolve that idea, to answer the question, what if? The question is just what if, right? We don't need to like explore all the details and figure out everything. I have a whole video where I ranted about like, I don't care too much for super extensive lore. I love short stories because you don't really need to know the why. It's just, here's what's going on. Isn't that interesting? And you just get to like bask in how interesting it is. And then you move on to the next story. And I thought that was so fun. Oh my goodness, I have this book too. Hold on. Okay, so yeah, the short stories that I really liked in this collection, this one about a restaurant that you go to the restaurant and they don't have a menu at all. Instead of ordering like, I want a hamburger, you tell them a specific date and location, and they bring you the food that you ate on like that date and location. So it like brings back a flood of memories. And this restaurant is like, what's going on in the kitchen? How do they know like what happened in my life? It's a little freaky, but also a little, again, it's just such a good what if. There's a really good like sapphic romance set after the Haitian Revolution. I did not know very much about the Haitian Revolution. So like the romance was sweet, but it was also really interesting to learn a little bit more about that point in history. There's another really good one about food. I like when she writes about food, apparently. There's like a woman who enjoys cooking, and a man brings her, like this mysterious, wizardy kind of man, brings her super rare ingredients, and he says like, if you can use these ingredients to make a really great meal, I'll bring you even more interesting, super rare ingredients. Just kind of absurd, but you're like, you want her to succeed and make these like really cool dishes. And I don't know, just a lot of these ideas that are just like, that's an interesting concept. It's perfect for a short story. Just like, wow, what an interesting idea. And now we're done. And she's really good at that. Fast-paced, obviously graphic novels are going to go by pretty quickly. I read all 4 of the volumes of Heartstopper in like 3 days. So yeah, I talked about Heartstopper in my favorites video, but basically it follows the story of these 2 British boys. One of them is like out and proud and gay, and the other guy is like finding out who he is, but they kind of start to develop feelings for one another, and you kind of follow the course of their relationship as they start, spoiler alert, as they start dating. I mean, it's pretty obvious. They're like practically holding hands on the cover, if I recall correctly. Then we start following their relationship. They start struggling with some outside issues, bullying. There is quite a heavy emphasis on eating disorders, so trigger warning for that. Nick's got kind of a terrible relationship with his dad, which I think will maybe be explored in the next volume. We haven't explored that too much, but family dynamics I think will be interesting to explore. Aside from Nick and Charlie, our 2 main characters, I also really, really love what's the friend's name? T. It starts with a T. Tao. I really like Tao. I think like he kind of comes off as a jerk to Charlie for a bit, but like I think the novels, the graphic novels, do a really good job of like explaining his perspective. And I really like Tao. I like, what is his girlfriend's name? Not Tori, but Tori. Tori, Charlie's sister, is so great. Very like blunt and straightforward about everything all the time. Oh, like Elle or Ellen. Elle, yeah, I love Elle. She is like so optimistic despite going through some crazy stuff, but she's like, I don't know, she's where she wants to be. I don't want to give too much away, but like she's happy about it, and she's really, really cool. Aled isn't mentioned in here, but I do love me some Aled, and I need to read Radio Silence because I believe that one's more focused on him. But the character work is just so great in Heartstopper. It's really cute. Yeah, it's listed as lighthearted, but there are also definitely emotional moments as well. It's great. It's a great balance of, you got your fluff, you got your angst, you got all your like things that you could ever want in a romance series. It's just really cute. I don't really have much to say about the Mere Mortals Star Trek book. They're not like landing with me a ton. I will say I do remember feeling like I liked the second one a lot more than the first one. But again, it was like January that I read this. Actually, December, I just finished it in January. I think if I recall correctly, the second book starts to focus a lot more on these original characters, which is so funny because I believe in my previous reading update, I was like, yeah, reading Star Trek books kind of feels like reading weird fan fiction. And when I'm reading fan fiction, I'm not a huge fan of original characters. I'm like, that's kind of cringe. In this case, it's like as soon as you get it in a physical medium, it feels more cringe to read about characters that aren't the author's own. And then when I read about these characters that the author himself made, I'm like, oh, these are cool, unique ideas rather than just kind of using Star Trek to get people to buy your book. You know what I mean? Like the characters that he created himself, there's one named Erica. I can't remember her last name, but I really like Erica and the other like kind of captain lady that she works with. Quite frankly, as far as female characters created by a man in like the late 90s, early 2000s, they're pretty awesome. The alien race that he's come up with is interesting. Now that I'm thinking about it, I do remember like the stakes are pretty high. Maybe I do need to go read the third one. They're interacting with this alien race that is really, really powerful. And they're basically being held hostage by this alien race that like never wants the outside world to interact with them. So when the Star Trek people maybe crash landed, I can't remember how exactly they came to this planet, but they come to this planet and these aliens are like, well, now that you're here, you can't leave. We're going to be nice to you, but you can't leave because you might tell people about us. But obviously our main characters want to get home. And it's like, how are they going to do it? I don't know. These aliens can like communicate telepathically and like make material out of thin air. Like what are they going to do? Now that I think about it, okay, I did really enjoy the second one. Wow. It's just so far gone, like in the back of my mind, but maybe I need to go back and reread not reread, but go ahead and read the third book. Page number, I read one 500-page book. What are you? Mere Mortals? Blood of Olympus, yeah. It doesn't feel 500 pages when it's Rick Riordan. Man, I read through that bad boy in under 2 weeks. Like, it did not feel like 500 pages. Less than 300, Heartstopper. Oh, really? Most of the Heartstoppers are over 300. They're pretty thin. They don't feel that long. Mostly I read books that are 300 to 499 pages, which is unsurprising and probably pretty similar to what I read last year. 14% nonfiction. How the Word is Passed and the Sun Does Shine. Yeah, I always want to read more nonfiction. And I actually, last year I think I said that I didn't particularly enjoy nonfiction, and I'm going to embrace the fact that I like fiction. I'm just going to read what I like. I will say the 2 nonfiction books that I read this year, I really enjoyed. So I don't know. I think I just need to pick good nonfiction books. Maybe that's what I learned here. And fiction, 86%. Unsurprising. My genres, yep. Fantasy, 7. Half, I was going to say 50%. Wow. Half the books that I read this year were fantasy. And I wonder if everything I would even consider fantasy is under here. How Long Till Black Future Month, Blood of Olympus, Assassin's Apprentice. Yeah, one of the Trials of Apollo is not being counted here. Wait, tell me I put all the Trials of Apollo books. Tell me I'm not missing something. No, Tyrant's Tomb. Oh my gosh, I never added Tower of Nero. Frick! Oh no, all my stats are messed up. Let me just quickly go through my stats now. I read 15 books this year. Wow. 5,907 pages. Honestly, that's not bad. For some reason, when I thought it was 13 or 14, I was like, oh, that's so sad, not enough. 15? That feels more like, yeah. That's I don't know. Anyway, I read 8 fantasy books. Thought something felt off. I've been reading too much Riordan when the second biggest genre is middle grade. I just love him so much. All my little demigod kids. I just love them so much. Why are there only 5 here? What the heck? Now, Hidden Oracle, Burning Maze, Dark Prophecy. What's Blood of Olympus if it's not middle grade? I'm confused. Okay. I read 5 LGBT books, which are Heartstopper, and How Long Till Black Future Month. 5 young adult, Heartstopper, Blood of Olympus. To me, by the way, I talk about this in my Trials of Apollo books video. My Trials of Apollo books. Hi, I'm Rick Riordan. In my Trials of Apollo video, to me, Trials of Apollo is way more, it's silly. It's so freaking silly. But actually, deep down, it's way more mature than Percy Jackson, the first 5 books, or Heroes of Olympus. It handles really, really dark themes in, I think, a pretty masterful way. Anyway, I'm not mad about the categorization of this, but I just think it's funny how Blood of Olympus is classed as young adult, and then Trials of Apollo got middle grade. Romance, 4, so all Heartstopper, yeah. Graphic novel, 4, all Heartstopper. Contemporary, Heartstopper? Yeah, one of them, for some reason, isn't included there. Science fiction is probably How Long Till Black Future Month and Mere Mortals, yep. Speculative fiction, How Long Till Black Future Month? Yeah. Race, probably How the Word is Passed? Yeah. Magical realism, that's true, there is definitely magical realism in How Long Till Black Future Month. I love magical realism. Yeah, I really need to get my magical realism higher than 1 book, because I do love some magical realism. Short stories, obviously that one. Memoir. Oh, The Sun Does Shine was a memoir. And history, probably How the Word is Passed. Most read authors. Rick Riordan and Alice Oseman. Surprise, surprise. My books read over time chart is just absolutely all over the place. I just had a wild year, guys. Yeah, so I started out strong in January. I finished 2 books in January. But again, they were books that I had started in December. So That's the weird thing about Storygraph. I need to start doing a better job of marking when I start a book and when I finish. So I finished 2 books in January, 1 book in February, 1 in March, and then I had a dip in April. Again, see, this is not the best representation because it looks like I read 0 books in April and then read 3 books in May, but that's not completely true. Actually, that is completely true because I know that the books that I read in May were Heartstopper. So I guess I read nothing in April. Like, again, I was probably like slowly reading through something, but just didn't finish it. But in May, I guess I just read Heartstopper, and then June, maybe another Heartstopper. July, 1 book, 2 books in August, and then September, again, a pretty big dip. I didn't read anything in September, then 1 book, October, November, December. So for me, I don't know, like, to me that felt bad, having these months where I didn't read anything. Just made me feel kind of like crap. Like, you get through a whole month and you're like, wow, I didn't accomplish anything. But actually, I had a whole plan to, like, record this video and do some kind of, like, motivational thing where I'm kind of, like, in denial of what a bad reading year I had. Like, it may have seemed like a bad reading year, but it was actually really good because I read stuff that I liked. Actually, like, genuinely looking back at this, it was not that bad of a reading year. First of all, I forgot to add a whole book to my story graph. And second of all, sure, there were months where I read 0 books or only 1, but I also had 1, 2, 3, 4 months where I read 2 or 3 books. I don't know. I don't feel like it's that bad. It was definitely a slower reading year for me. I just had a lot going on. And now, I don't know why, you know, it's the new year, but I'm just like feeling reinvigorated to read a little bit more. I've like been watching a lot of booktube videos and like getting excited for books that I might read this year. I'm really liking Farseer, and I'm also currently reading Murder on the Orient Express. I'm in, I guess, kind of a book club with a couple friends where we try to read some classics. So I'm excited about reading this year. I'm not going to set a reading goal for myself. I'm just going to read what I want. I'm going to read what I like. It's going to be great. And yeah, like I said, I was looking at this reading year like pretty disappointed. I didn't read that many books. I knew that 4 of the books that I read were graphic novels, which in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't count. But I don't know. The books that I read this year, I really enjoyed. Like, if you go back and watch my reading vlog from last year, there were several books that I was like, I didn't particularly like this one because of this and that. And it's fine to be critical and read things that you don't particularly enjoy. I don't even think, like, I tried to say I didn't like Mere Mortals that much, but even when I started talking about that one, I was like, wait, I actually liked that book a lot. So, like, every book I read this year, like, I need to start doing star ratings because, like, if I had, in terms of star ratings, this would be a way more successful year than last year. All this to say, I think I had a pretty good reading year. 15? Not bad for me. That's an average reading year for me. And I hope that as I get more into the swing of things with this job that I've been, getting acclimated to, hopefully I'll be able to read a little bit more in 2022 and continue to read things that I really enjoy. So I've been rambling for quite a long time. Thank you for looking at my, Storygraph stats with me. I really do like looking at the stats. I think it's so interesting. And let me know your favorite thing that you read this year. Give me some good book recommendations in the comments below. For me, definitely the most exciting read that I had was the 3rd Trials of Apollo book. I really, really do recommend the Trials of Apollo if you're into any of the Riordan stuff. And I also really, really enjoyed Black Future Month. And I need to read another Jemison this year. I really like her writing. So yeah, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I put videos out whenever I want about music, media, linguistics, and whatever else is on my mind. Thanks so much for watching. See ya.